At 6:22 in the morning on a Thursday, Nkechi Okafor stood at the window of MedFirst Pharmacy on Halsted Street in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, counting coins into her palm for the third time. The total was the same as the first time and the second time, $4.71. The bottle of amoxicillin on the counter between her and the pharmacist cost $6.80. The man behind her in the wool hat and the cracked shoes had already placed the bottle on the counter. He had already explained it twice. He had been coughing since he sat down in the waiting chair at 6 that morning, the kind of cough that came from somewhere below the chest, the kind that had been building for 2 weeks at least. The pharmacist, whose name tag read "Blessing" in capital letters under the MedFirst logo, looked at the coins and then looked at the man. She picked up the bottle with 2 fingers and placed it back behind the counter without saying anything. Nkechi watched this happen. She was 31 years old, 108 pounds, which was 9 pounds less than she weighed the year before, because she had been skipping lunches since February to make the numbers work. She still wore the navy blue scrubs from her overnight shift at Roseland Community Hospital. Her shift had ended at 5:45 a.m. She had taken the 34 bus 14 blocks south to pick up her own prescription before going home, which was 2 transfers and 45 minutes away. She reached into the front pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a folded bill. A 5. She had been holding it since Tuesday, when she counted the week and realized she was $4 short of her bus pass renewal and could not spend it on anything else. She put the $5 on the counter next to her coins. "Use what I have," she said. "Whatever is left over, I'll come back for mine next week." Blessing did not say thank you. She processed the transaction with the same expression she had used to look at the coins. The man in the wool hat accepted the bag and looked at Nkechi for 2 full seconds before he picked up his things and walked slowly toward the door. At the door, he stopped. He turned around. He said, "What is your name?" She told him. "Nkechi Okafor." He said nothing else. He walked out into the cold. She did not think about him again for 11 days. She did not expect to. What she could not have known, standing in that pharmacy with $3.21 left in her name, was that the man she had just helped was the only person in the state of Illinois who held the answer to a question she had been trying to solve for 7 years, and that he had already begun doing something about it. Nkechi had been born in a 2-bedroom flat on the 3rd floor of a building on Lagos Main Island, the second of 4 children, and had known from the age of 9 that she wanted to be a nurse. Not a doctor, a nurse. She had explained the difference to her mother once. Doctors decided what was wrong with people. Nurses stayed with them while they went through it. Her mother, Pauline Okafor, had nodded as if she had always known this about her daughter, and was just waiting for the child to figure it out herself. She came to Chicago at 24 on a work authorization through a hospital placement program, and had been at Roseland Community Hospital for 7 years. By the time of the pharmacy morning, she worked the overnight shift in the general ward, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week, sometimes 6 when they were short-staffed, which was most weeks. Her base salary was $37,000 a year. After taxes, after the $62 a month she sent to Lagos for her mother's hypertension medication, after her studio apartment on 103rd Street, with the radiator that worked every other day, and the neighbor who cooked fish at midnight, she had approximately $400 left at the end of each month. She kept this written in a small blue exercise book she bought from a dollar store on Michigan Avenue. Every expense, every transfer, every bus pass, every bag of beans and plantain from the market on 95th. She had kept this kind of record since she was 19 years old. Her mother had taught her that a person who does not know where their money is does not know where they are standing. She had been saving, not fast. $50 here, $30 there, slid into a different column in the blue book under a heading she had written in capital letters and underlined 3 times, "School." Nkechi wanted to become a nurse practitioner. The program she had identified, at Rush University on West Harrison, cost $44,000 for the 2-year part-time track, the one that would let her keep working nights. She had been accepted 2 years earlier and deferred. She had been accepted again the following year and deferred again. The 3rd letter was already on her kitchen table, open with the deadline circled in red pen. May 17th. She was $11,400 short. She had 3 weeks. She had not told anyone at work because she did not want anyone at work to feel they had to do something about it. She had not told her mother because her mother would cry and then feel responsible. She had told the blue exercise book, and the blue exercise book had told her the same thing every time she opened it. Not enough. Not yet. The morning she gave the man at the pharmacy her $5 was the morning she had sat on the bus home and opened the blue book and written the new total, which was now further from the goal than it had been the Monday before, because of a pharmacy copay she forgot she owed from January. She closed the book. She held it in both hands for a minute, the way her grandmother had taught her to hold things that mattered, not gripping them, just holding them, so the thing knew it was cared for. Then she put the book back in her bag and watched the city go past the window. She had looked into other options. This was not the first Thursday she had counted a shortfall, and then done something about the counting rather than the shortfall. In January, when the gap was still $14,000, she had visited the financial aid office at Rush and sat across from a counselor named Deirdre, who had read through her file and said, very gently, that the income-based assistance programs were unfortunately tiered in a way that did not apply to her tax bracket. When Nkechi pointed out that she was sending $62 a month to Lagos and working an average of 54.5 hours a week, Deirdre had looked at the screen and said there was not a field in the system for that. In March, she had applied for 2 private nursing scholarships, one from the Illinois Nurses Association and one from a charitable trust attached to a hospital system on the north side. She had submitted both applications before the deadline. One came back with a form letter. The other did not come back at all. She had written both outcomes in the blue exercise book without comment, the way you write a fact rather than a feeling. The deadline on May 17th was not the first deadline. It was the third. Each deferral had cost her nothing except the year itself, and she had treated each lost year the way she treated a long overnight shift. Not as a punishment, but as a thing that had to be gotten through before the next thing could begin. The bus made its stop at 103rd, and she got off into the cold with her bag over one shoulder and her scrubs holding the smell of the overnight ward, antiseptic and something like warm cotton, and she walked the 7 minutes home without hurrying because there was nowhere to hurry to. And the cold was the kind of Chicago cold that rewarded walking into rather than against. Inside the apartment, the radiator was doing what it did every other day, which was nothing. She put the kettle on and sat at the table and opened the blue exercise book again and looked at the number. $11,471. She had been counting it so long that the number had lost its shape. It was just marks on paper. Then she thought of the patient in bed 7 and the 4 a.m. pillow adjustment, and the morning crew, and whether anyone would remember, and the number became a number again, which was a different and worse thing. She closed the book. She put her hands flat on the cover. She sat there until the kettle finished. She poured the water. She did not open the book again that morning. The ward sister at Roseland was a woman named Constance Ndukwe, who had been on the floor for 22 years, and who spoke to patients the way some people speak to grandchildren, not talking down to them, but sitting at their level. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had a habit of placing one hand flat on a patient's arm when she came to check on them, as though she needed to feel the temperature to know how they truly were. It was Constance who had first seen, 11 months earlier, the way Nkechi handled the room in bed 7. A man named Emmanuel Bright had been brought in at 2 a.m. following a fall. He was 73 years old, confused, and terrified in the particular way that elderly people become terrified in hospitals at night. Not of the injury, but of the noise and the strangeness and the fact that nobody had called his daughter yet, and he could not remember her number. Nkechi had pulled a chair to the side of his bed and sat with him for 40 minutes while the registration was completed, and the daughter was located. She had not charted this time. There was no line on any form for 40 minutes of just being present. But when the daughter arrived and found her father asleep and calm, she had pressed Constance's arm in the hallway and said, "Who sat with him?" He said a nurse sat with him the whole time. Constance had looked through the window at Nkechi, who was by then refilling saline bags and making no noise about what she had done. She had not brought it up, but she remembered. 11 days after the pharmacy morning, Constance called Nkechi into the small office behind the nurse's station just before the start of the overnight shift. She had a letter in her hand, sealed, addressed to Nkechi by full name, which she had received at the hospital because nobody outside of Lagos had Nkechi's apartment address, except the utility company. The return address on the envelope was a legal firm on LaSalle Street in the Loop. Nkechi did not open it there. She thanked Constance and put it in the front pocket of her scrubs and went to the floor. At 11:14 p.m., when the ward was quiet and the patient in bed 3 had finally stopped asking for the television remote, and the patient in bed 11 had taken her medication and the paperwork was done, she sat down in the corner chair by the window that looked out over the parking structure and opened the letter. It was one page. It was not from a lawyer. It was from a woman named Ada Mensah, who wrote that she was reaching out on behalf of her father, whose name was Chief Kolade Mensah, and who had met Nkechi at MedFirst Pharmacy on Halsted Street on a Thursday morning 11 days prior. She wrote that her father had asked her to send this letter to the hospital, believing that a nurse as careful as this woman would be known at her place of work. The letter said that Chief Kolade Mensah wished to speak with Nkechi at her earliest convenience. It included a phone number and an address on Bourdillon Road. She read the letter twice. She read it a third time. Then she sat with it in her hand and looked out at the parking structure the way she had looked at the number in the blue exercise book, trying to find the shape of it. She thought about the man in the wool hat. She thought about the way he had stopped at the door and asked her name. She had taken this as simple courtesy, the kind of moment that closes itself. People said thank you in different ways, and this had been his way. She had not kept it. Now here was the letter. She folded it and put it back in the envelope. She thought, calmly and practically, about what it might mean. A foundation, a grant program, a phone number. It was possible this was something real. It was also possible she would call and find something different from what the letter suggested, something that required something from her that she did not have, or that turned out to apply to a different kind of person, in a different kind of situation. She had been in Chicago long enough to know that envelopes from LaSalle Street with gold lettering on the return address did not generally arrive for nurses with $3.21 and a radiator that worked every other day. She was not cynical. She was specific. There was a difference. A car below had its lights on and nobody in it, which happened sometimes at this hour, and she watched the lights for a moment until the car's driver came back and turned them off. If this story is already moving through you the way I think it is, stay with me, because what Nkechi discovered when she made that phone call changed more than just her own life. She folded the letter back into the envelope. She placed it in the front pocket of her scrubs, next to her pen and her small blue exercise book. She went back to the floor. She did not sleep when she got home. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her, and the deadline notice for Rush University beside it, and a mug of ginger tea going cold between her hands. At 9:47 a.m. she called the number. Ada Mensah answered on the second ring. She had a voice that was careful and direct in the way of someone who has managed difficult things for a long time. She told Nkechi that her father was recovering. The amoxicillin had worked. He had been to see their family doctor, who confirmed a chest infection that had been developing since early February and could have become serious without treatment. Ada said her father was 71 years old and had come to Chicago from Accra the previous fall to attend a medical conference. He had been staying with Ada, who had lived in Chicago for 9 years, and had woken that Thursday morning with a cough that alarmed her. She had been at work. He had gone to the pharmacy himself because he was stubborn, she said, and would not wait. She said her father wanted to know if Nkechi would come to the house. Nkechi sat with the phone against her ear for a moment. Outside her window, the neighbor's radio was playing something from the 80s, faint through the wall. She said yes. She arrived on a Saturday at 11 in the morning, in the same navy scrubs she always wore on her days off, because she had 3 pairs of them and only one set of clothes she considered presentable, which was a gray skirt and a white blouse she had bought at a second-hand shop on 87th Street for $14. She wore the gray skirt and the white blouse. Ada's building was in Evanston, not far from the lake. The lobby was warm and quiet, with a floor that reflected the light from the windows. A doorman nodded at her without any expression that suggested she did or did not belong there. Chief Kolade Mensah was sitting in a chair near the window when Ada brought her in. He was smaller than she had remembered him, smaller than the wool hat and the cracked shoes had suggested, which was not a thing she had registered at the time. He had the careful posture of a man who had learned to carry his age without showing it. His hands rested on his knees. He wore a light-colored shirt and a pair of dark trousers that had been pressed. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone they have been thinking about for 11 days. He said, "Sit down, please." She sat. He told her, without any preamble, what he did. He was the founder and chairman of the Mensa Foundation, which operated in 7 West African countries and 3 diaspora cities, including Chicago, where they ran a nursing education grant program for sub-Saharan African healthcare workers in the United States. The program had been running for 4 years. It had helped 19 nurses, 17 of whom had already completed advanced degrees. The grant covered tuition, fees, and 1 year of part-time study support. He said, "Ada found your hospital. She found your record. You have never been late. You have never called in sick. You have worked 6 nights a week for the last 8 months because they are short-staffed, and you have not complained about this to anyone in management. One of your colleagues told our inquiries team that you sat with a frightened old man for 40 minutes in the middle of the night and never charted the time." He paused. He said, "How much do you need?" She had the blue exercise book in her bag. She did not take it out. She knew the number the same way she knew her mother's phone number and her ward locker combination, and the number of stairs between the bus stop and her apartment door. $11,400, she said. For Rush University, the part-time track. The deadline is May 17th. He looked at her steadily. The grant is $15,000, he said. The rest goes into a continuing education account in your name. You will not touch the principal. Ada, who had been standing near the kitchen doorway, moved quietly into the room and placed a folder on the coffee table between them. "The application," Ada said. "It's 3 pages. Most of it is already filled in." Nkechi looked at the folder. She looked at the man across from her. She thought of the pharmacist who had not said thank you. She thought of the $5 she had put on the counter without thinking about it the way people think about things they cannot afford. She thought of the blue exercise book in her bag, all those columns in her own handwriting, all that careful counting that had gotten her this close and no further. She thought of her mother in Lagos saying, "A person who does not know where their money is does not know where they are standing." And then she thought of the other thing her mother said, which was that she had never once, in 31 years, watched this daughter not know where she was standing. She did not cry. She pressed one hand flat against her knee, the way Constance pressed her hand against a patient's arm, to know how they truly were. She picked up the folder. She submitted the application to Rush University on May 14th, 3 days before the deadline. The foundation wired the tuition on May 22nd. She received her confirmation letter on June 3rd, which was a Monday, and she read it at the kitchen table with the same mug of ginger tea that had gone cold on her for months. Except this time she let it go cold on purpose, just to sit with the letter a little longer. She did not quit Roseland. She had never intended to quit Roseland. She was there at 9 p.m. that Monday as she always was, in the navy scrubs, with the pen in the front pocket and the small blue exercise book, and she went to the floor and did the work the same way she always did. But something in the ward changed, not that night, but over the weeks that followed. Constance noticed it first, the way she noticed most things. She said to Nkechi, a month later, in the small office behind the nurses' station, "You look like someone who has remembered what they came for." Nkechi thought about that for a moment. "I think that's right," she said. Chief Kolade Mensah returned to Accra on June 18th. Before he left, he asked Ada to arrange for a small luncheon at her apartment. He invited Nkechi, and he invited, with her permission, Constance Ndukwe, whom the foundation had identified as the person most responsible for the kind of floor culture that produced nurses like Nkechi. He said he had something to ask Constance as well, which was whether she would consider becoming an advisor to the grant program selection committee at a modest annual honorarium. Constance, who had not been asked to do anything other than manage a hospital floor in 22 years, said yes so quickly that Ada laughed. The luncheon lasted 3 hours. Nkechi ate a full plate of jollof rice and fried plantain for the first time in 7 months. She had not realized how long it had been since she had eaten a meal that was not counted against a budget. On the bus home, she opened the blue exercise book. She looked at the columns. She looked at the heading in capital letters she had underlined 3 times. She drew a single line through it. Not an X, just a line, clean and deliberate, the way you mark something that is done. Then she opened to a fresh page and began a new column. The heading this time was written in the same capital letters, but she did not underline it because it did not need underlining. It said, Next. The man who sold Chief Kalada Mensa the wool hat he wore that Thursday morning for $4 from a street stall near the Chicago River probably never thought about that hat again. The pharmacist named Blessing clocked out at 7 a.m. and took the train home and thought about something else entirely. The people in that pharmacy who watched a woman in navy scrubs put her only bill on a counter for a stranger they did not know. Most of them looked away and thought about their own mornings. What Nkechi Okafor carried out of that pharmacy was not the $5. She had already released the $5. What she carried out was the same thing she had always carried. The particular knowledge that a body in distress needs someone to stay with it through the worst part, and that staying costs something, and that the cost is exactly what makes it worth anything. You cannot train a person to know that. You cannot issue it in a policy, or measure it on a performance review, or reproduce it in a procedure manual. It is the thing a person carries inside them or does not carry. It is the part of a caregiver that no institution can create and no hardship can take. The world spends a great deal of time passing over people who carry this. It passes over them in pharmacies and hospital lobbies, and government offices and bank lines. It passes over them because they are not loud about what they hold, because their power is in the quiet, because the people who run the counters are looking for something that announces itself, and what these people carry does not announce. It only shows, and only to the ones who have already learned to look. The ones the world overlooks are often the ones holding the whole thing together. Not heroically, not dramatically, just steadily, quietly, at 6 a.m. on a Thursday with $4.71 and a $5 bill they could not afford, and the particular kind of dignity that does not wait to see if it will be thanked. Nkechi Okafor began her part-time nurse practitioner program at Rush University on September 9th. She was the 20th recipient of the Mensa Foundation grant in the city of Chicago. She continued her overnight shifts at Roseland. She continued the blue exercise book, the new column, the new heading. On the morning of her first class, she wore the gray skirt and the white blouse. She sat in the 3rd row. She had a pen. She had a notebook. She had arrived 12 minutes early, because she was the kind of person who knew that arriving late was a way of telling a room that your time mattered more than its time. She was not thinking about the pharmacy. She was not thinking about Chief Mensa or the letter or the folder on the coffee table. She was thinking about the patient in bed 7 she had checked on at 4 a.m. before the shift ended, and whether the morning crew had remembered to adjust the pillow configuration the way she had written in the notes. Because the patient in bed 7 could not tell you when something was wrong. She could only show you, and Nkechi had learned, 7 years ago, and every year since, how to read what a person was showing you without waiting for them to say it. That, in the end, was everything. Before you go, if you know someone who has been giving and giving and waiting, share this story with them. They may need to be reminded that what they are carrying has value, even when nobody at the counter sees it. And here is a question I want you to sit with. If you had been standing in that pharmacy that morning with your own $5 and your own shortage, and a stranger who could not quite reach, what would you have done? Not what you hope you would have done. What do you actually believe you would have done? Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.